What's happening in Ukraine? What's America's responsibility in Ukraine, or our role, and how's it going to resolve itself? These are questions that I think pretty much every American should be asking themselves, and we need some answers to help us find those answers. Is the Vice President of Foreign Policy and National Security for the Mighty Heritage Foundation, Jim Carafano. Thank you for coming into the studio. Good to talk with you.
This is great. Congrats on the show and the studio. This is amazing. Seb Gorka is going to be so jealous.
Oh, he is.
Yes.
He's going mad.
And he should be.
Yeah. You just got back from Ukraine, so you can give us a first-hand examination of it. In fact, I believe you wrote a cover story for the Washington Examiner
I did. You know, so there's two interesting. You know, first of all, conservatives are not of one mind on this.
Right.
And I actually think, that's fine. I think one of the strengths of the conservative movement is we agree to argue about these things because that's how you get to think. And it's not an orthodoxy of it's this or that. So I don't really have issue at all when people come down at different. What we try to do, and I did in this article, is one is I had my guys really dig into the facts, and then I went there so I could see for myself and bring that back and share that.
Well, and that's why we wanted you here, to sort of give us this. So, and by the way, what maddens me about all that, see, I'm not an answer giver necessarily. I'm a question asker.
Right, yeah.
And what bothers me about the way this conversation is going right now, certainly in conservative circles, is there's some questions you're not even allowed to ask, and that seems kind of silly,
right,
considering this is, an invading country, a partner of ours, although not a NATO ally.
Right.
American dollars going for military assistance. If we can't ask questions about that, why?
And that, of course, is one of the great ills of this horribly bipartisan world that we got into, which is either we have to have Manichaean different answers, or because politicians want to get out of town on Thursday, they have to slap something in or they can't debate it and move on.
Yeah.
That's not serving the American people. I mean, there's some element of truth of every side of this debate of where conservatives are on their issue. Mm-hmm. We start with a very simple formula, which is what's in the national interest?
Yeah.
What's the most efficacious way to do that? Rule number 2 is you don't get credit for 2 out of 3. You can't do something that's just good for foreign policy, but it hurts the American taxpayer or it undermines individual liberty. Yeah. You have to do things to keep America free, safe, and prosperous. And number 3 is what you're doing damn well ought to work.
Yeah. Oh, imagine that.
I know, these are shocker things. So look, I mean, the one thing that was confirmed for me, which I really understood, is helping Ukraine defend itself, right, is in our interest. And the simple reason for that is China and Russia would love to wake up one morning in a world without America. And if there's anything they can do to make that happen, they're going to do that. And if we let them do that, someday we may wake up alone. So the Russians, their stated goal, you just have to look at their stuff, is to reconquer all the post-Soviet states, to have dictatorial control over Central Europe, to see NATO dissolved, to see America pushed into the sea. That's exactly what the Chinese want. The Chinese were the biggest cheerleaders for this because they want a Europe that's weakened and destabilized and distracted because it marginalizes us. So they're both operating at the premise that we're doing something that's hurting America. So obviously, us doing something that makes sense to block that makes sense. So I will say, no question on the military side. Without U.S. military aid, there would not be a Ukraine today. Ukrainians will tell you that. I was in Bucha, which was the high water mark of the Russian advance on Kyiv. Dude, you would be stunned at how not long it takes to drive from downtown Kyiv to Bucha, right?
So and they were knocking on the door.
And when you see the hulks of the Russian the tanks there, you go, really, how close these guys really. And of course, they devastated that town, and there's a huge mass grave there. The military aid is definitely keeping the Ukrainians in the fight. That's in our interest. The aid is going to the Ukrainian military, and it's being used to fight Russians. So there's no question about corruption or waste or anything else on the military aid side.
Let me ask you a little bit more about the aid, though, because it seems like we're getting reports every 3 or 4 weeks, another tens of billions of dollars going. None of this was budgeted, certainly, because we didn't plan on it.
Right.
Have we had a hearing? Should we have a hearing? It's like, okay, what's the big picture here? How much is it going to cost in the long run? And one other thing, I'm now hearing that military aid is going to training, and that pushes some buttons from my history class with regard to the Vietnam situation, because a lot of that was military training, and then it ended up being our guys doing the training, and then our guys got pulled into the fight.
Yeah, well, our guys are not going to be doing the fighting here. We're not a party to this conflict, and I can't ever see any president or Congress making the United States a party to the Ukraine conflict. To your point about the aid, and of course, we got a lot of hot water at this for Heritage, because we are supportive of helping Ukraine, and yet when they came up for a budget supplemental, we said it's a bad idea, and people went after us like, oh, you guys love Vladimir Putin. They said, no, we don't love Vladimir Putin. but we want a policy that furthers U.S. interests and doesn't, throw the U.S. taxpayer overboard. And this is what gets me really mad, right? You see people say, we shouldn't be spending another nickel on Ukraine until we secure the border. Whatever. Like, dude, are you not? Look at the balance sheet here. We are spending multi-trillions of dollars. We have ballooned the U.S. debt to $31 trillion, and 99% of that spending is being dumped into this country into leftist Yahoo stuff.
Yeah.
So all our argument is, dude, okay, money for Ukraine, no problem. Go back to the multi-trillions of dollars that you're spending on COVID relief and transsexual drag shows,
right.
and take that, reallocate that money for defense.
Yeah. Or something that actually serves America's interests. I get that.
It was a double good, right?
Well, and the other problem is you've got rhetoric from Joe Biden where he'll jump out there and say, we'll spend whatever it takes. Whoa, what do you mean whatever it takes to defend Ukraine? We got to put some
But this
kind
is
of...
Joe Biden, but this is not a Ukraine problem. This is a Joe Biden problem. He thinks that the American taxpayer is his personal ATM.
Yeah.
And they do all the deposits, and he does all the withdrawals, and he never has to balance the checkbook.
Right.
This is why people get divorced, right? People marry people like Joe Biden, and then a couple of years later, their life savings are gone, and they go, "Oh my God, what was I thinking?" We have Alexis, and she has 37, diamond bracelets, and I can't pay the mortgage. This is what he's doing to the economy. So it was not ever a question about whether we should support the Ukraine. It's a question about really stupid domestic spending and people refusing to pay attention to that.
Okay.
Civilian side, different question,
Yeah.
right? This is a country that, it was free of the Soviet Union after the fall of the wall, but the Russians never let Ukraine move forward. The oligarchs, and so Ukraine never became a Western, transparent, properly governed country.
Right.
In its history. It started to move in that direction after Euromaidan. The Russians did everything they could to undermine that. They tried to move in that direction after the invasion in 2014. The Russians did everything. It was really, ironically, with the election of Zelensky, where the people of Ukraine said, we're really done with this.
Yeah.
We want a president that fights corruption. And so ironically, people are attacking Zelensky about corruption. He's the guy that wanted to fight corruption. He's a little distracted by the day job of fighting the country. But the Ukrainians recognize that they have to rebuild the country, and just throwing money at this is actually not going to do that. And that's my other problem.
Yeah.
If you just throw money at this country like we did in Afghanistan, we're going to have a foreign aid-dependent basket case that never gets better, and it'll actually be weaker and more vulnerable to the Russians in the future. So I'm all for helping the Ukrainians. They lost half their economy. I'm all for helping them get back on their feet. I'm not for wasting taxpayers' money, and I'm not for just throwing money at a problem like it's a dumpster fire. It's actually going to make things worse.
I know it's quaint, Jim, in this town to talk about all these billions and trillions of dollars and how you're going to spend it and what you're spending it on and coming to the aid of a country who's being invaded. It's quaint to throw the word morality in there.
Right.
But I still believe that we are a moral nation. We were founded on moral principles, and I'd like to think that we still have those values. Do you believe we have a moral obligation to the country of Ukraine, considering how they were disarmed in the 90s, where we convinced them that if they if they disarmed themselves with regard to whatever nuclear arsenal they had when they became a young fledgling country, that we'd be there by their side? No, we never put it in writing, but do we have a moral obligation in this fight?
Well, no. Where we were stupid was a stable Ukraine is helpful to a stable Europe, which is in American interest, and we took our eye off the ball, and we didn't push back and let that happen. Look, even today.
Wait, when Crimea was invaded?
No,
or
even going back to the 90s.
Okay.
I mean, it actually started with President George Bush in the famous Chicken Kiev speech, who actually went to the Ukrainians and said, "You know what? You should just stay part of the Soviet Union." I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But look, here's where morality comes into it for me.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
This is too important. 5 more minutes with Jim Carafano, Heritage Foundation. In just a moment. Keep it here. It's O'Connor Tonight.